Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stay with us as the Suns get set to shine.
Here's Perry, to Gar Hurd. Here's the jump shot.
Comes to Marley, a long three. He got it! He got it! Into Booker. Here's the three. Suzanne! Oliver, Sir Charles, and he flies in for a wham, bam, slam. Bravo time! He got it! Suzanne! Oh, brother!
Welcome to 7 Seconds or Less. This is a show about the NBA with a Phoenix Suns focus. My name is Max McCauley, and I am joined as always by my co-host. His name is David Nash. David, I know you live in the country of Igor Stan, but how are you doing otherwise?
I'm doing okay, Max. Last night was a bit of a rough one, but I never really get to ask you. How are you feeling after, I guess, the whole week and last night's events, Max?
Oh, that's nice of you to ask how I'm doing. I'm doing fine. I wasn't doing so good last night. If you follow me on Twitter, you would have seen that. But I've cooled down a little bit. We're going to talk about it, but I've cooled down, David.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to delving into that one and some other stuff on today's episode, Max.
Yeah, so today we actually have 3 segments, even though we normally only have 2. It's because we weren't planning on talking about the most recent Suns game because, you know, it can get a little tedious to talk about every single 20-point blowout, but the Boston game necessitates talking because there was some stuff that happened. So we'll go into that, then we're going to move on to kind of a segment I'm pretty excited about, David. We're gonna jump into the GM shoes, into James Jones's shoes, I guess, as the interim GM, and we're going to talk about what we would do to fix this team. Because I think everyone agrees that this team is broken. If you don't agree with that, I'm not sure what you're watching. So I think we all kind of disagree on how to fix it, but we all agree it needs to be fixed. So we're going to jump in and try to do that. And then we're going to finish up with some 2019 NBA draft talk, which it's been billed as sort of a boring draft, David, but I don't know. I watched Duke the other night. I don't think this is going to be a boring draft.
Yeah, we'll get into that at the end of the episode. It's maybe a shallow draft, but It's far from boring, and there's some pretty interesting guys at the very top. Obviously, a couple of our regular segments thrown in there amongst it all, Max. And yeah, I'm excited to get into this one too. But before we do, we'll go over the week that was. So we actually won a game, Max. It's hard to remember, but since we last recorded, we beat Memphis 102-100. We then obviously had the very disappointing loss to Brooklyn 82-104 before the most recent loss in overtime to Boston 109-116. That puts us at 2-9 at the moment, Max. Last in the division, last in the conference, but not last in the league, thank God, thanks to a couple of other pretty god-awful teams. But not too much other news going on at the moment, Max, and this is where we normally touch on that sort of stuff. So as you said, we thought we'd maybe jump into the Boston game and get a few things off our chest.
Yeah, I have that's a good way to put it. I have a few things to get off my chest, David. So let's start with, this is probably what bothers me the most. And I think it's just judging based on who I read and who I look at it on Twitter, what bothered most people the most. And that's that it's really hard to explain why, if you're going to have an offense that's just Devin Booker ISOs for the entire stretch and overtime, which, don't get me wrong, I think is maybe your best bet against a defense as good as Boston, because if you try to do Igor's pass it around thing, you're just going to commit turnovers. But if you're going to do that, why the hell is Isaiah Cannon on the floor and not Mikal Bridges? What is he doing for you as the off-ball guy that Bridges can't do much better? Especially considering the fact that Cannon had played just an enormous amount of minutes. Like, you'd think going into overtime, you're like, all right, he played too much, let's put Mikal in. Or even on the last possession, when you need to make a stop, you put Mikal in. David, do you have the defense for this, or do you think this is an Igor mistake?
It's definitely an Igor mistake, and it probably wasn't the only one, if we're being perfectly honest, by him or, other guys on the team. It was a collective effort. I think Booker said it best. To lose the game from that position, a lot of things have to go wrong, and I think a lot of things did. I think your point is probably the biggest one that went wrong, and as you said, the one that a lot of people were questioning after the game was through. We've heard from Igor, his kind of response, I suppose, was that he wanted to go with, who got them in that position, which is, I commented on that. It's pretty typical coach talk. You kind of expect that from head coaches from time to time.
It's old fogey coach talk.
It is, and it doesn't make it the right call. The thing that I really, and I haven't brought this up before, the thing that I really thought of was Brad Stevens' decision to make Marcus Smart the starter in the second half, and how that is in contrast to Igor refusing to, switch something up. I mean, you know what? I kind of sympathize with what he was saying down the stretch of regulation, even though I don't necessarily agree with it. I think what you said about, switching, say, Bridges in for Kanan makes a hell of a lot of sense, particularly if, you're just going to run Devin Booker ISO, which they, mostly did. But, Stevens having the courage to make that kind of decision at the start of the second half to change something up, I would have liked to have seen Igor change the starting lineup for the start of overtime up if he was hell-bent on finishing the game in regulation with the guys that got them there, as he said, Max.
And that's kind of what scares me so much about this, is that if I had thought that Igor thought that Cannon was the best player for the spot, then I wouldn't be so concerned. But I don't think that at all. I mean, less than a week ago, we had him after the Grizzlies game saying that Mikal Bridges is going to be playing in all the important spots down the stretch. Like, he was on record saying that. And it almost makes me think that, like, I don't want to say that he froze in the moment or something like that, but I kind of feel like in game, he's getting maybe a little bit overwhelmed. I think that he's probably looking back on these tape of these games and thinking the same things we are, like, oh my God, how did I not do this, this, and this? And, sometimes I think we overrate or maybe we underestimate how difficult it is to not just watch on your TV on your couch and, make these calls, but just be in the moment. You've got 20,000 people watching you. Well, not at Suns games, but you know what I mean. And there's a lot of pressure, and I think it's harder to make these calls. But here's the thing: that's what NBA head coaches have to do. That's why you're getting paid to be an NBA head coach. That's why there's only 30 of you. You got to be able to do that. And I'm not saying Igor can't do it, but I'm saying right now he's not good at it yet, and I'm not. It's going to take some time.
Yeah, it's a clear mistake. I guess the only thing I would say in response to that is almost every time we've criticized Igor for something, he's come back with something that was more along the lines of what we were expecting. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think he'd probably watch that game back and recognize a couple of mistakes that he made. It's always tricky. I was kind of commenting after the game that I hoped that he'd, come out and just be strong and put that game on him and we could probably move on from it. He didn't do that for whatever reason. We've kept hearing comments about what their defensive coverage towards the end of that regulation possession was supposed to be, which has kind of dragged it on a little bit instead of just putting an end to it. But yeah, it's concerning, but I'm sure he's going to learn from it. The positive for me, Max, is that things were really clicking for 3 quarters and that got us in that position in the first place. And don't want to dwell on individual mistakes too much when the first 3 quarters of the game, as I said, were actually a real step in the right direction from where this team had come from.
Yeah, no doubt. The energy level, the effort level, those things were much better, which is nice to see because the players were saying that after the Nets game. And it's good to see that they're not just saying these things, they do care and they are trying to follow up on them. So I want to get in a little bit more on what you just briefly touched on there, which is sort of Igor's explanation for, I think in particular, the last play of regulation. So there was a miscommunication, it sounds like it. Igor is saying that the plan there was to foul, which is, like, in my opinion, the obvious thing to do, considering Boston had no timeouts left. So if you foul them there, they shoot 2 free throws. No matter what, they probably have to miss second free throw, because if you make both and the Suns get the ball, you go down the other side of the court, you make 1 or 2, it doesn't really matter because even on the rebound, they don't have a timeout. So they have to go the full length of the court. Like, that's a super low percentage chance to score.
Yeah.
So I think you have to foul there. And Igor's saying that he told them to foul, or at least that was the plan. Because another thing is, I'm not convinced Igor was in charge of that last play, because when they showed it on Fox Sports, it was just Joe Prunty talking to the guys. But Ayton, Cannon, and Booker all said that the plan only was to switch. There was no plan to foul. And I saw a good point made on Twitter that there's really no good explanations for what happened here. Either the players ignored Igor, the players are too dumb to listen to what Igor said, or Igor just couldn't communicate it. And none of those things are, or Igor's lying. And none of those 4 things are good. Like, it's all bad. And we got to figure out a way to clear the communication up, because if we can't get simple instructions across, like you need to foul in this situation, like how are you supposed to run your team?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Max, and I think we've seen a few more quotes today in reference to that, and probably the clearest thing or the clearest indication that I saw from Igor was that maybe he wasn't strong enough on that directive. I think they were a little worried of maybe failing someone as crafty as Kyrie, going up for 3 on that possession. So I think, he made the direct instruction, or Prunty made the direct instruction to switch everything, and then they also happened to throw in there that they should be fouling if someone's got their back to the basket. They probably didn't put enough emphasis as they should have on that second instruction, and that seems to be what has led to this miscommunication. There's a few things with, I guess, negatives that we've picked out of Igor through 10 games where, I'm seeing that he's perhaps coaching the team as if it's a bunch of vets that he's used to, maybe that Utah team where he was giving instructions at times, or whether it was his national team experience where he had a very clear unit together that were used to playing to each other. And I think he's made a few mistakes there where he's not realizing the guys that he's coaching here, and that he probably needs to be a bit clearer with them. And so that would be my explanation for that. And then with the Kanan stuff, I think, maybe there was a mistake made there that he wanted a secondary playmaker on the floor. But as you said, if they're then just going to run Devin Booker ISO all the time, that doesn't match up. So I think, rewatching the game, I think that maybe I'm just trying to put myself in Igor's shoes and inside his head. I think that may have been the justification in his mind, but then what we saw on the court just didn't match up with that. But should we maybe talk about a couple of positives to finish recapping the Boston game, Max?
I think a big positive was that Richaun Holmes looked really, really good to me.
Agreed.
I don't know if that's just relative to the big man performances we're getting, but he looked good, at least to my eye. I thought he played pretty solid defense. I thought he looked active and springy. I think that he's going to be fitting in pretty well to that backup big role behind Ayton. In fact, I know it's impossible to do this if you're Igor or kind of anyone, but they probably should have benched Ayton down the stretch for Holmes, because Ayton wasn't part of the offense, and Holmes is better than Ayton at defense right now. So it probably would have made more sense just to put Holmes in there, but I know they can't do it. So I thought that was a pretty big positive. The other positive is that, Devin Booker is a fucking superhero. He's insane. I think after the game, I don't know if you saw Kyrie get interviewed, but Kyrie was, just kind of talking about the game. And but then as soon as he brought up Devin Booker, his eyes lit up and he goes, "That guy's like a supreme talent," I think is what he said. He just lit up. Kyrie knows, Booker is he's incredible. Just everything you want out of a superstar. He sort of got tired in overtime. He played a jillion minutes in a row. He also, one more criticism on Booker is on that last play where they were instructed to switch, which everyone did say they were instructed to switch. They definitely were supposed to switch. Booker might not know what switch means because he didn't switch. So that is one criticism, but I don't know, David, what do you think?
It's a nice juxtaposition between the two of those. Kyrie clearly carried, particularly through their early struggles, and then got hot late, but then could count on some of his other guys when, the Suns really pressed on him. Conversely to that, we definitely counted on Booker to keep us in the game and really relied solely on him down the stretch. And at some point he gave way and he couldn't keep hitting buckets. So that was a clear black and white scenario with the two of those guys. But, my other positive would be TJ Warren. He had 29 points on 9 of 17. He's now 15 of 30 on 3-watch here, Max, which is just ridiculous. He only had the 1 assist, but it was a really nice drop-off to Ayton early on in the game, which kind of, made my eyes light up. And probably my only other thing that I would say on him that I need to get off my chest here, Max, is Marcus Morris should have been tossed for that flagrant, and we may not be talking about a loss right now. I know that's a bit of an excuse, but that is a clear sign to me that result matters rather than intent when they're reviewing those things on the video, because that was a guy who literally hunted the guy down to foul him from behind. Could have ended in a really nasty injury, and if that's not a flagrant 2, I don't know what is in the NBA.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir here. I hate how much, not even just NBA, this happens in every sport, the results-based analysis on these kind of things, that just shouldn't be the way you look at it. It should be intent. It's annoying, and I agree with you. I thought the Morris thing was insane, and he should have been tossed. And then I can't believe I forgot to mention TJ. You're so right. He was incredibly good, particularly in the first half. But he continued to be decent. But the first half, he was like nuclear. I can't believe how... David, the shooting is not just real. I'm starting to think he's just like a really good shooter now.
He hit a couple of tough ones. There was that one in the corner with a guy right in his face, and he wanted to shoot that. And then there was another one that I highlighted with a Devin Booker assist, which... anyone listening who hasn't seen it can go and look at, most of Devin Booker's assists on our Twitter account. But, he was just walked straight into a three from Booker, hit it like it was nothing. And it's just a completely different TJ. And, when he's like that, Max, particularly without a starting caliber point guard on this team, which, we might get to in a minute with our main section for this episode, he makes such a difference because we've really struggled to get into the teeth of a defense. And TJ was really doing that early, and that's where all those open threes come from. And lo and behold, guys start hitting shots and everything's fun for a little while there, Max.
Okay, before we move on, I gotta bring this up. I have a thought on Igor. I'm not saying that this is what he is, but I want to ask you what you think the chances are that this is the case, okay?
I think I know what's coming.
You might. We'll see. This happens more in the NFL, but it's also an NBA thing. Sometimes there are guys who are just overqualified to be assistant coaches. Like, they're really, really good at being assistant coaches, whether it be an assistant offensive coach or an assistant defensive coach. In the NFL, it's the offensive coordinator or the defensive coordinator. And they're so insanely good at it. And like, you want to give them a head coaching job because they deserve it from that aspect. But once they get into the head coaching role, they just, whatever it is that's different between being an offensive coordinator and being a head coach, like, they just don't have whatever that extra thing is you need. And they're just better off just being the best offensive coordinator in the league or whatever. So my question is for you, what are the chances that's what Igor is? He's just an overqualified, super good offensive coach who probably doesn't have whatever it takes to be an NBA head coach.
I think there's a good chance. I think anytime you hire a rookie coach, that's one of the things that you're, waiting to see. Probably my caveat to that would be I really hope that they give him time and give him a decent NBA roster at some point in this contract to prove whether that's true or not. I think judging him on what he currently has and what his credentials and as an NBA coach are would be terribly unfair on him, if I'm being honest. And, we can't forget he's won a European title as a head coach. And, that's tournament play, but you've got to qualify. He was the coach of that team for quite a few years. So he does have credentials as a head coach. It may not be in the NBA, and I know that's what you're alluding to. It's a different kind of beast, but I don't think we can rule it out, but I also don't think we can rule out him becoming a very good coach in the NBA, and I might have something on that later in our Did You Know segment, Max.
I like the tease. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's far too early. They shouldn't fire him. That would be insane to fire him. It just seems like something that's starting to develop in my mind as a possibility. I just kind of like the early indications are pointing that way. And you make a good point when you bring up his coaching of national teams. The only counter, and you sort of touch on this, is that the NBA is kind of a different beast because you're managing these egos of these players who are playing for contracts. It's a little easier, I think, than managing players who are there for their country and want to be there and are actively listening to you, because I'm not convinced all the players are actively listening to Igor. But that's enough of that. Unless you want to respond, we can move on to the GM stuff.
I think the GM stuff will tie in very nicely with that kind of conversation, Max. So I think we can dive straight into that.
All right, let's do it. So here's how we're gonna handle this. We're gonna break this into 4 stages, David. We're gonna figure out what we would do like immediately, like if we took over as GM, what we would do to fix the team now. We're gonna do sort of like a trade deadline, like what we would do for the rest of the season. We're gonna do a kind of free agency time fix. We're gonna skip the draft because we're gonna go into the draft later, but we're gonna do kind of like a, I don't know, like this summer sort of fix. And then we're going to talk about kind of what our plan would be if we were the GMs going forwards. David, why don't you start us off with what you would do if you were made the GM right now?
Yeah, as you said, Max, it's an interesting exercise to look into. The Suns kind of gift us this segment really with their current GM situation. They don't really have a permanent GM. So, we're kind of looking at it as if we've been hired. I'm kind of calling my whole 4 stages here Operation Make Devin Booker Happy. You'll see a key theme through all my 4 sections around our star player. But as far as immediate change goes, I'm calling that one go get a point guard. I'm sure anyone who has followed me on Twitter or through this pod realizes that is no surprise, but I'm putting that on the agenda right away. I'm giving December 15, which is when the kind of unofficial opening of the trade period is, because, you know, everyone who was signed to free agent contracts in the off-season can be traded, and therefore things kind of just open up a little bit, Max. So I'm kind of putting that as the absolute latest deadline. I think you put the Milwaukee pick on the table. You probably also put the Phoenix pick, as long as it's top 5 protected, and we'll get to that at the end of the episode with our draft stuff and why I would protect it to top 5. And I would go and get a point guard, Max.
So do you have any particular names in mind?
I do. I'm not going to dive into them too much because they're all guys we've kind of discussed before, and it's not really what this section is about.
Sure.
But I will say that I'm not talking the John Wall types. You know, he's on my notes here, like definitely not John Wall. That's not what I'm saying. I'm looking around the league at guys with kind of 1 year left on their contract, but that you might also be interested as backups going forward. You know, if you're giving up a first round pick, whilst it is a bit of an emergency situation and you have to give something to get something, Max, you'd kind of hope that if everything goes well, you might be able to, you know, use their bird rights or just use their past few months enjoying with the team that they might want to come back. So, you know, you're looking at guys like Tyus Jones in Minnesota, maybe Patrick Beverley, TJ McConnell in Philly is someone that, you know, keeps coming up, D'Angelo Russell, DeLon Wright, and Teodosic with the Clippers. But just to round that point out, Max, I'm really talking about the flow-on effect here of what getting a point guard would do for this team immediately. I think straight away you move Kane into the backup point guard position. That's kind of what he's been his entire career, as a kind of borderline backup guy, and that would mean that you don't have to play a Kobo, who I think you and I both agree is just simply not ready to be playing kind of regular minutes in the NBA at the moment. As we touched on before, it gives Igor a chance. You know, things are looking pretty dire at the moment at stages, but it really gives him a chance to set this team up, which ties straight into, you know, what it could do for both Devin Booker and Ayton. I think down the stretch in games, it's going to release Booker, make him even more dangerous. And, you know, plenty of people have touched on how hard it is to get Ayton involved in the game at times. You know, he's got chemistry with Booker, Jackson, doesn't seem to really have great chemistry with Kanan at all on kind of pick and roll or entry passes. So I think you'd be looking for a pretty immediate lift there. I think it makes all the role players better. We've said that they've all kind of been struggling because, you know, they're all kind of, I guess, essentially being asked to do more than they're capable of, Max. And, you know, I think it's the easiest one decision move, which ties into, I'll kind of rattle off a few things that you'd be expecting to kind of improve straight away here. So the Suns are currently 29th in turnovers, also 29th in opposition points off turnovers, 29th in points in the paint, which is kind of, you know, maybe an Ayton thing, but as I think James Jones discussed, it is a bit of a point of attack thing with the guards as well. We're currently 29th points off opposition turnovers. We're 26th in fast break points ourselves. I think you and I have talked about it quite a bit privately, that Kanan is really struggling to just run a fast break. He doesn't seem to have that zip or nous to kind of get us an easy bucket. We're kind of really fighting hard to score, Max. And we're 30th for opposition fast break points. So, you know, I've rattled off quite a bit there, Max, but, you know, that's my immediate change.
You've thought about this, haven't you?
Just a little bit.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to get to a point guard in a second. Mine's not a point guard right away, just because I don't think that we're going to be able to trade for a point guard right away, because I think we probably would have if we had a chance. I mean, you said you'd put our pick top 5 protector on the table. That would probably get the attention of some teams, especially if it's like for McConnell. That probably happens, but I don't think that's what you meant. Okay, so what I would do is I would immediately change the rotation. I don't think anybody who follows me on Twitter would be surprised to hear me say that. First thing I would do, Josh Jackson sits for 2 to 3 games. He's just out. Sorry, you're sitting, Josh. You're watching, you're learning. This is your timeout. I'm mad at you. You're not playing well. You're not doing what I want. You're sitting down for 2 to 3 games. When he comes back, my starting lineup is Booker, Jackson, Mikal, Ariza, and Ayton. I want to put Jackson in a super limited role. He's going to play defense. And Jackson, if you're not playing defense, you're not playing anymore. You're out. He's going to play defense. He's going to shoot when he's open. If he shoots a step back, he's out. If he takes a stupid drive, he's out. Jackson needs to be rebuilt, in my opinion. I think was basically wasted by last year. It just kind of ruined him. Summer League was maybe even worse. The start of the season was just, I don't know if it was just continued green light or if he just doesn't know how to play any other way. Igor's obviously now just starting to bench him, but Jackson needs like a whole rehabilitation tour because he is a disaster right now, to put it lightly. And I think that one of my primary goals would be to rehabilitate Jackson's value because a number 4 pick from last year being totally worthless at this stage is not good. So in addition to the starting lineup, I'd have TJ run the bench unit. TJ deserves to start, but TJ, sorry, we need you on the bench because you're our only guy who can reliably create buckets, who's not named Devin Booker. So you got to be on the bench unit. I'd have Melton with him. Maybe Kane didn't get some minutes, but primarily Melton because he plays defense and he can shoot a little bit. I'd have Richaun Holmes with a sizable role because Richaun Holmes is good. Bender gets in over Anderson. I understand that we may have given Anderson a promise, but guess what? I wasn't there at the time. This is new Max GM, and I'm not giving Anderson any minutes. He gets 0 minutes. And
Do you have a signed contract, Anderson? Because if not, sorry, but promise broken.
I don't see it on paper, Ryan. And then Okobo, I love Okobo. I think he's going to be a good sixth man, but he goes to the G League because I don't think he's ready yet. But yeah, that's how I would change the rotation. David, what do you do going forward?
This is funny. I thought this might happen. I reckon we've kind of flipped 1 and 2 around a little bit, and it just kind of expresses where we see this team or how we would both differently approach this team, I guess, for the very short term and then for the rest of the season. But going into my remainder of 2018-19 season, I'm calling that find out what you've got. So this would kind of, I'd roll with the above, try and get wins, try and boost morale, hope that the players really buy into what Igor has been preaching because the results start to come to fruition with a new point guard running the team and everyone just clicking a little bit more. And then you kind of hit the All-Star break, Max, and there's about 23 games, I think, after the All-Star break for the Suns. And that's where, you've hopefully showed Booker and the team the direction that they're going in. But then you kind of really want to see what you've got, Max. So we'll be going into year 1 of Booker's extension the following season, and that's where, it's going to start to become crunch time. I've seen a few people mention that Booker might already demand a trade. I think that's just a little bit silly. He's got essentially no leverage. He hasn't even started his extension yet. I think we've at least got a few years to please Booker, and that's what my whole kind of philosophy here is building around. So, we're kind of looking at a do-over next off-season, and I think a lot of the things that we're seeing with what's happening early on in this season, we need to avoid next season. And a lot of that comes down to roster spots. So we've just got too many young guys on this team. And if you're looking at having a team that you want to compete for the playoffs, you're going to have to bring in a lot of veteran type players to help this young core. So, I'm starting a Kobo or Melton in the back half of the season to see what you've got there. You don't want any Kanan or Anderson or Jamal Crawford, hopefully, thank God. I'm testing Richaun Holmes and Jackson, as you said, really making them prove that they're going to be part of the core going forward. Definitely starting Mikal Bridges, limiting Ariza's minutes. And like you said in section 1, he probably doesn't deserve it, but I'm putting TJ back to 6th man and see whether that's a role that, he can really thrive in going forward, because I think that's his role on a good team, Max.
Yeah, I think we both agree on that. So yeah, you're right. We are just kind of flipping our first and second here, because my thing is that I think once December 15 hits, I think that's when we start shopping Ariza for a point guard.
Interesting.
I think of these teams that are contenders, this teams that are contenders like the Pacers and like the Clippers, and these teams that have like extra point guards but are trying to win, I don't think they're so interested in the Milwaukee pick. I think they would be really interested in Trevor Ariza, though. So I think you could kind of flip him for like a Corey Joseph.
That's a really good point, Max.
Yeah, I think you could flip him for a Corey Joseph. Or imagine Shai Gilgeous-Alexander takes over. At that point, like Patrick Beverley, Trevor Ariza might be something that the Clippers are interested in. I mean, obviously the contracts don't match. You'd have to throw a little more in there. But yeah, I think that's the way you can kind of get yourself a veteran point guard on December 15th. And at that point, I'll change my rotation around. Well, I'll put the point guard in the starting lineup, because I do agree with you that this team needs like a real point guard really badly. And I think the temporary solution, if we can't find one, is just to put Booker there and put our best players around him. But sooner rather than later, this team needs to get a point guard, because Otherwise, they're just going to waste what they have. I mean, like you said, you can't really have a real NBA team without a point guard. Igor's offense is... I do believe Igor's like a brilliant offensive mind, and I think that he's being undercut badly, hamstrung by the fact that he doesn't have an NBA point guard in his team. I mean, I think most offensive quote-unquote geniuses would be hamstrung by not having a point guard. So it'd be great to see them get that.
Yeah.
So I think my ultimate dream goal here would be that Utah, like Exum explodes, which I don't think is going to happen. He doesn't look good. But if Exum exploded, Ariza for Ricky Rubio would just be ideal.
People are going to think that we talk a hell of a lot in preparation before our pods with how much this is matching up, Max, with different sections, because I may be touching on a certain Ricky Rubio in my section 3 here, Max. So obviously we talk quite a lot about the Suns and a lot of ideas blend in, but really funny how this has worked out. I think you make a great point. I just want to touch on that. You know, with me looking for immediate change with going and getting a point guard, as you mentioned, I think the biggest restriction to that is getting someone to bite on what we're willing to offer. I think your point of Trevor Ariza's contract really makes a hell of a lot of sense, both from looking at contenders who may want Ariza as a player and then, you know, looking at his salary for matching purposes. You know, with Tyson Chandler going, we've kind of lost that contract to throw after a George Hill or someone like that, because basically makes it impossible with, you know, all of our valuable contracts left are either guys we don't want to really get rid of or, you know, definitely guys that no one's going to take. Case in point, Ryan Anderson. So that's a really good point by you, Max. I guess I'm just a little bit worried about it dragging on that long. You know, obviously I put December 15 as my absolute latest deadline. You've kind of got it as your starting point here. So maybe there is a little bit of crossover between the two of us there if it happens.
Yeah, well, so I think the reason why that is I think you've always been a little bit lower on Booker being the point guard than I am, right?
Yeah, and I think the way that you talk about it is, you know, potentially if the point guard situation is just off the table in terms of getting someone, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. You know, just off the back of, you know, illustrating from the Boston game in our 7 plays or less video on Twitter that, you know, the whole team revolved around Devin Booker and his playmaking in that first half, Max, and it kind of stopped when he stopped playmaking. So, you know, I think whilst I am lower on you, I definitely agree that on this current roster, if you're going to change things around and look for a bit of a circuit breaker, I think Booker moving to point guard is definitely the move that would need to be made.
So let's go ahead and jump into the next part of this, right? Which I guess is kind of like not the long-term future, but like the immediate future. And it's tough because a lot's going to depend on where this team finishes and like kind of what happens in the draft, because, you know, if, as we touch on later, if they get Zion Williamson or RJ Barrett, it's going to affect their free agency plans. But for me, it's like, I don't want them to get another Tyson Chandler, another Jared Dudley, another Trevor Ariza. I don't want a guy who's like old and just trying to catch the money.
Agreed.
I think they need to give like a real contract to somebody who's actually good. I think that's like what they really need to do. And someone who like been on good teams, fits the team well. And for me, we've talked about this guy before. If we don't end up getting some sort of power forward in the draft or whatever, give me Nikola Mirotic. I think Nikola Mirotic is one of the top 40 best players in the entire NBA right now. He's great on offense and defense. He'd be perfect next to Ayton because he spreads the floor and he, as I said, plays defense. He's tough. He's intense. He's just a good player. That guy, I have no fear that he would come to this team and not be good. He's just a good basketball player.
You'll never guess the second guy on my list, Max.
I probably mentioned him and his initials might be RR.
Yep, so I've got 2 guys here. I've kind of said that, as I said before, the off-season is kind of the 2017-18 off-season do-over. The Suns will probably have more money to play with than they did last season, and we should note that kind of restricted them a little bit. You know, we were both fans of the Ariza signing at the time, particularly with what other options were available. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm totally negative already on what the Suns did last offseason.
Well, so can I jump in there? Because we were both positive. You're right. And one of the reasons why is because we wanted to evaluate what's on this roster and like spin big in 2019. And we've evaluated, and I think we're ready to find out what we need.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I'm kind of saying hopefully by the off-season with my kind of stage 1 and 2 here, you know, you're kind of looking at having a pretty solid starting core of Booker, Bridges, and Ayton. And then you've kind of got, hopefully, best case scenario, at least a couple of guys ready to come off the bench in TJ, maybe Josh Jackson, a couple of the rookies or sophomores are also showing that they can be counted on as role players off the bench. But, there's still a few holes there, Max. There's definite point guard and power forward needs probably in the starting lineup. I'm not going to delve into them too much because you've already mentioned both of them as my top targets, and that would be Nikola Mirotic and Ricky Rubio. I think both of those guys really slot in from an age standpoint. I think what you said before, you don't want to go too old. I think both of those guys are around the age you're looking for to bring in some playing vets that can actually contribute to the team. And we'll have anywhere between 27 and 37 mil in space next year, depending on what they do with Ryan Anderson's contract. So I think you can probably go and get both of those guys and even still have a little bit of money left over to, fill in some of the gaps. As I said before, if you're looking to really be a playoff team next season with Devin Booker and Ayton, you're kind of going to need a good handful of vets that just really fill the gaps in around them. So a guy like Danny Green is, someone that when all the money's spent might be sitting there that, bring defense, shooting, and don't chase the big fish or restricted free agents. Just, really target the guys that you need and build out a solid roster for hopefully Igor to work with, Max.
Let's get to the future, and the way I kind of look at this is like you can't predict like the far future, so it's kind of trying to analyze what you think you have now that will matter in the future.
There's so many variables here, Max, and I know we're making it sound really simple, but particularly this last section around a couple of years from now and the future core, there's so many things that could happen. But in an ideal world, Max, where are you looking?
So I'm just kind of looking at what we have in the roster. Devin Booker's obviously the dude. I think no one's debating that at this point. He's not only showing incredible scoring prowess, which we know he had, he's also starting to show the passing thing. Is he the next James Harden? I'm not going to say he's the next James Harden, but he's got a chance to be the next James Harden. And if he is, that's the guy you're building around.
He's showing signs.
Ayton, you drafted number 1 overall. He's obviously somebody that you're putting in your plans. I think there's been very encouraging things about him. I think there's been very discouraging things about him. So I think it remains to be seen. But I mean, at this point, obviously you're still building around him. There's really no way you're not. And then I think the only other person I'm considering in this thing is Mikal Bridges, who I'm not like putting in as a definite piece by any means. But I mean, David, what do you think? Has Mikal Bridges been like the most promising young prospect the Suns have had other than Booker and Ayton in the past 5 years?
Easily, like without a doubt. When I think of Mikal, obviously the on-court product is very encouraging, but you can't look over what the Suns gave up for Mikal. A lot of people obviously at the time thought it was a massive reach, but to me it's done now, and the way I look at it is that they just had incredible trust in what this guy was going to become. So when you're thinking about throwing him in to trades and things like that and attaching another first round pick with him to maybe go get a guy, the realistic person in me then kind of says, well, hang on a minute, that's 3 first round draft picks because that's what we gave up for Mikal. So, I don't think we're getting rid of him anytime soon, Max. I think it's very, very clear the way this franchise thinks about that player.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm with him for the most part. He's shown a lot on defense, which is obviously key on this team. The dude can obviously shoot. The key to him being like a third best player on a really good team is whether he's going to be able to do a little bit of the kind of secondary playmaking. Like when there's a closeout on him in the corner, is he going to be able to take a couple dribbles, pull up, or a couple dribbles past somebody on the move? That's going to be kind of like the next step for him. But I think that his floor at this point is going to be a really good 3-and-D player. Like, he's already that, I think. Like, if you look at the net ratings on him and, like, it's everything about him, he's already, I think, a good 3-and-D player in the NBA. I don't know why Igor's not fucking playing him.
It's not hard to stand out on defense on this team, Max, and he's definitely done that.
True.
I did find there was an interesting quote, made a note on his, point of attack or his kind of denying the lane defense, which ever since I saw that quote, I've tried to take a special notice in that, and it is lacking a little bit, but he is a rookie and he's still showing great defense that a lot of other guys aren't on the team. But there's obviously, that's one area that they've asked him to focus on and work on, and I know a couple of smart draft people took that as a potential negative in his game, being able to keep in front of guys in the NBA. So that's something to watch for people going forward. But all I'd touch on there is, I think whilst I peg him as a kind of clear third starter on this team, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's the clear third best player in the core going forward. I just think that, particularly James Jones, it sounds like, really values a player like that in the starting unit. Doesn't necessarily mean he's the third best guy, as I said, but he's just that 3-and-D guy that makes winning plays and kind of has that winning background to him, and that's why they value him so much, Max.
Yeah, I kind of think he's like what James Jones wished he was in the NBA.
Definitely.
That's what James Jones was going for and just never could get there.
Yes, 100%.
Okay, anything else on the future?
Well, all I'd say, just to kind of round it out, Max, is that, you've got to buy into Booker and Ayton being your future at this point if you're the GM. Kind of everything has to build around them. So they both kind of create pretty obvious needs next to them at point guard and power forward due to, their own weaknesses. So on one hand, that kind of makes the job really easy because you know the kind of guys that you need to pair next to them in the backcourt and the front court. But it also makes it really hard, Max, because those players with those skills are actually quite hard to find. I think that's what we're going to find going forward. So, you've got to keep your eye out and put a premium on those things that you're really looking for next to Booker and Ayton.
And then, as we'll get into in just a second, they're going to have a high draft pick in this draft unless they screw it up and trade it. So if they get one of these crazy guys, then that's going to kind of change the entire calculus. So that's why we can't really totally say that the future's going to be, because it could change very, very quickly.
And they might need an enforcer, Max. Good teams always need an enforcer, and I'm kind of seeing that with these two guys. I'm not sure if Ayton's going to be Booker's enforcer. So, they might need a tough guy in that starting lineup with them, Max.
We'll get into this in a little bit, but I think that the top two guys in that draft, to me, are definitely enforcers. David, let's get into Did You Know?
All right, Max, it's safe to say this season hasn't quite gone to plan so far, and we've just finished talking about how we would try and fix it if we were in charge. But before we dive into the 2019 draft class, as you said, I've got a couple of Suns stories that may offer a little bit of hope for the rest of the season. So Max, did you know this season's start of 2-9 is the worst start to a season for the franchise since the 96-97 season? Can you tell me what the Suns' record through 11 games was in that season, Max?
Well, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of choices here, do I? So it's, what's worse than 2-9? I guess it's either 1-10 or 0-11. I'll go 1-10.
It was 0-11. You chose the wrong one. In fact, it took until the 14th game for the Suns to pick up their first win of the season, Max. You then have to go back another decade to find a start as rough as this season, with the 85-86 Suns starting 1-10, as you just guessed, through 11 games. Interestingly, both of those teams had 4 rookies on the main roster, the same as the current team has with Ayton, Bridges, Melton, and Okobo. While the 85-86 team turned things around a little bit, finishing with 32 wins on the season, it's the 96-97 team that has the far more interesting turnaround, Max. Of course, Cotton Fist Simmons resigned as head coach after an 0-8 start, which ended his third stint with Phoenix, actually, and an overall coaching record of 832 wins and 775 losses. I believe that still places him in the top 15 of the NBA's most winning coaches, Max. Danny Ainge took over the team, and the Suns rallied to a final record of 40-42 and amazingly made the playoffs. Now, speaking of rookies, Max, as I said, this team, like the one currently, had 4 rookies on the team. Can you think who might have been the most famous rookie on that 96-97 team?
Michael Finley.
It was Steve Nash, drafted by the Suns with pick 15 and played 65 games and got 2 starts in his rookie season in Phoenix. But back to the team now. Nash was surrounded by the likes of Kevin Johnson, Wesley Person, Danny Manning, and Rex Chapman. He also started the year with Sam Cassell, Robert Horry, and as you just mentioned, Michael Finley, but ended it with Jason Kidd and Cedric Sabalas. It was those few in-season trades of guys going out and guys coming in, plus the coaching change that saw Phoenix break a couple of records, Max. They became the first NBA team to make the playoffs after a 10-plus losing streak to start the season. They also became the only team to record a 10-plus losing streak and a 10-plus winning streak in the same season. Eventually, the Suns lost in the first round of the playoffs 2-3 to Seattle. But what a wild roller coaster ride for the fans that season would have been. Now, I'm not suggesting this current team has that sort of a turnaround in them. Maybe the absolute best we could hope for is the 32 wins that the 85-86 team managed, Max, but I do suspect we might see some trades, as we alluded to before, and fingers crossed not, but maybe a possible coaching change as well to try and turn things around if this team keeps going downhill. So I'll leave you and the listeners with this as a small caution when it comes to possibly changing coaches for the current Suns team. And as I teased a little earlier, Max, the 2018 Coach of the Year and runner-up were Dwayne Casey and Brad Stevens. Casey won 33 games in his first season. Brad Stevens won just 25. In 2017, a guy we know, Mike D'Antoni, won the award. In his first year with the Suns, he won the equivalent of 27 games for an 82-game season. 2016 was Steve Kerr, who of course won 67 games, which is ridiculous. And 2015's winner was Coach Bud, who started his career out with 38 wins. And then we get to 2014, Max, Greg Popovich. Pop also coached a short season in his first year. He won the equivalent of 21 games in his first season, and I believe if you look up reports and media from the time, was on the verge of getting fired, but the Spurs clearly made the right decision in holding on with Pop there. So that's all for Did You Know this week. Go look up the 85-86 or the 96-97 season, Suns fans, but for now, Max, we're going to assume things don't turn around all that great for the rest of the season, and therefore we're going to dive in a little early to some fun draft stuff.
Thanks, David. For all those millennials out there, that's how you know that the Suns used to suck in the past too. It's not just now. Okay, so let's get into the 2019 NBA draft, which in my opinion does not suck, David. The way we're going to do this, we're going to go through the top 5 guys. We're going to kind of talk about them a little bit and then say our dream fits team-wise in the NBA for each guy. And then you and I both have our own special guys we want to talk about after those guys. But David, do you want to throw out the first guy?
Yeah, before I do that, Max, I think it's important to maybe throw out a few teams here. So when we start listing our perfect match for these guys, there's a little bit of context. So, at the moment, the draft order's looking around about Cleveland, Phoenix, Washington, who might drop down, I would have thought, Chicago, Atlanta, Dallas. However, if it falls outside 5, Atlanta get that pick too. We've got Minnesota, the Knicks, Orlando, and Houston, who, may or may not rise up the board again. Teams that are looking better right now that might drop back, I think, might be Brooklyn and Detroit, Max. And keep an eye on Boston, who have Sacramento's pick, top 1 protected, Clippers pick, but lottery protected, and Memphis's 1 to 8. So I'm going to throw this at you here, Max, to get an order going. I'm going to stipulate that the 3 Duke guys have to be 1 to 3, and then Nasir Little 4 and Bol Bol 5. But how would you order the top 3 Duke guys? I know you watched the first full game last week of those guys. What are your initial thoughts?
My initial thoughts are, oh my God, what the hell? I've never seen a college team look like that. Let's start with Zion Williamson, because I think he's the headliner here.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing about Zion. People are worried about his ancillary skills, which, by the way, looked awesome in that game. His passing looked insane. His shooting, he had like a step back shot. He had threes. They all look fine. But even if he doesn't have that stuff, which I think he does, that dude just looks like such an overpowering athlete that it won't matter. I don't want to throw out too much hyperbole here, but I don't know if I've seen someone who looked like that athletically dominant since I watched like this high school tape of LeBron James in 2003. Like, that's the kind of level of athletic beast we're talking about here. And if he keeps showing that the whole season, he's going to be the undisputed number 1 pick. I don't think it'll be close. And not only that, I think he'll be like the most hyped up, like obvious number 1 since LeBron I mentioned in 2003.
Yeah, I don't love player comparisons, but other than maybe Larry Johnson, LeBron is the clear one for Zion here because of all the extra things that he's showing. And
the other one is Charles Barkley.
Yes, but I'm just excited to see him play a whole year of college. I've said that a few times because he looks like he's still going to be dominant at the NCAA level, but that was always the knock on him, is he just kind of beating up on high school kids as this giant human. And what you just touched on there, his passing and shooting, that's the things that I'm going to be really watching out for, because that's those things coming to the fore is what's going to make him a solidified number 1 pick here, Max. But who's your perfect match here, team-wise?
For me, I mean, the team that I think would be the best fit, no one's going to be surprised when I say this because of my, my love for this other player on this team, but please just put Zion Williamson and Luka Doncic on the same team, please. Can we just have that? Because that would just be the best thing that's ever happened. Can you imagine watching Luka, his playmaking with Zion Williamson? Oh my god!
I thought that might be coming, and that was definitely one team that I looked at, and that trade overall would look ridiculous if they kept a top 5 pick and managed to get Zion and Luka together. But I've had my own fun with this one, Max. We just compared him to LeBron James. I just said before that at the moment Cleveland have the number 1 pick in the draft if everything goes right. I think it would be hilarious if Zion Williamson, after LeBron James left Cleveland, goes back as the new LeBron James.
Can you imagine if after winning, like, what was it, like 4 number 1 picks in the past decade and a half, they win another one in the Zion draft? Come on.
I'm just having fun with it. It would be, it would break NBA Twitter, that's for sure.
All right, let's go on to RJ Barrett, who was my favorite of these guys over the summer. And, I mean, he scored 33 points on the 2 Duke's opening games, so it's not like he was a slouch or anything. Just Zion's so ridiculous. So I'll go right into a player comparison for people who haven't seen him, which, by the way, if you haven't watched the Duke game against Kentucky yet, go watch it. Trust me, it's worth it.
Especially if you're a Suns fan who's been watching some disappointing games recently. If you need a cheer up.
It can be fun to watch basketball. But RJ Barrett is, to me, he's Dwayne Wade. Not quite the crazy athletic finisher type, although he's got that really long stride thing he gets to. But I think like a better playmaker. He's got legitimately great vision for like his size and his athleticism combo. I think he's like, I don't want to call him a point guard, but I think like he could be a primary initiator just because of his like overall force. And if you put him on the same team as Devin Booker, which by the way, oops, I just spoiled it. I have him with Phoenix. I think RJ Barrett and Devin Booker together would be, you don't need a point guard at that point because those two would just be fearsome together. It'd be ridiculous to have those two in the same backcourt.
Yeah.
And that's my RJ Barrett thing.
Yeah, the other comp I see is DeRozan with him. Not personally. I see that thrown around with him. You know, on the limited stuff that I've seen from him, I just don't see it. I think it's more of a measurables thing, and we'll get to that with some of these other guys who are hard to comp to current players as well. You can kind of find guys that are similar in size and things, but stylistically, I don't see that at all. I don't know if it's the left-hand thing, but I actually see a lot of Ben Simmons in RJ Barrett with, you know, obviously a bit more willingness to shoot. If anything, if I had one knock on RJ Barrett right now, it's that he just likes to shoot a little too much, Max.
Yeah, he does like to shoot. But he also, I agree with that, like the jump shot's not great, but the scoring around the rim and the ability to get to the rim is, I mean, so this is kind of a weird comparison, but for Suns fans it'll make sense. Like the way TJ Warren just puts the ball in the bucket when he's around the rim, like no matter what, that's kind of RJ Barrett. The dude just puts the ball in the bucket. It's insane. And that's kind of where I get away from DeRozan, he settles for jumpers a lot more. He's good at it, so I'm not blaming him, but he's more of that kind of guy. RJ Barrett just like, he has this move. He already has a patented move, and he takes these two like long, they're not even Euro step strides, they're just like long ass strides that the defender's not ready for. It just gets to the rim. He can do it whenever he wants. That's kind of where I get the Wade thing, because Wade was also able to like dice to the rim whenever he wanted. And that's kind of where I'm getting at. RJ Barrett is just, he's a savant at scoring around the rim. And
that's where I get the Ben Simmons thing when I watch him. It's definitely the left-handed thing, but it's also those last couple of long strides to get around the defense. I think TJ Warren is interesting. You know, he's got that, you know, nous to just get the ball in the bucket, but he does it, you know, quite often on short steps and kind of just craftiness, whereas RJ Barrett just has that fluidity, that real smoothness going towards the bucket. And that's where I see the Ben Simmons stuff for me as, you know, someone who obviously watched a lot of Ben Simmons pre-NBA. But my perfect match here is Chicago. I think, you know, I really like what they're building with their bigs, but they've obviously signed Zach LaVine. But, you know, as a future core going forward, I really love RJ Barrett as your lead guy and, you know, surround him with shooters. And I think Wendell Carter is a great guy to have at the 5. And then obviously you've got Lauri Markkanen at the 4 as well. So that would be my perfect match for RJ Barrett.
Man, if Chicago got RJ Barrett, I might have to watch them on League Pass every night. That would be something to watch, man. I do want to clear up the fact that I don't think RJ Barrett is TJ Warren. It's literally just the fact that he can score very well on the rim.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
All right, let's go on to Cam Reddish, who, David, I know you really like, so let you lead on this guy.
I wouldn't say he's my favorite of the 3 prospects. I just think, you know, with my Phoenix Suns hat on, you're obviously not going to turn down Zion Williamson or RJ Barrett. You definitely find a way to fit them into your starting lineup. But I just think kind of fit-wise, particularly if Igor's still the head coach of this team, I love Cam Reddish. Player comparison-wise, I've seen anything from Tracy McGrady to Rudy Gay, which is pretty ridiculous. But, I just think he's that kind of multi-positional guy, which Igor obviously loves. He can handle quite a bit as a lead guy. He's a pretty willing shooter from the outside and can kind of guard, 1 through 4 from all reports. And that's something I'm going to keep watch of throughout this season. Obviously, on Duke, he's kind of that third fiddle behind RJ Barrett and Zion. When I look up negatives of Cam, I see a lot of people just kind of questioning whether he can be a lead guy if you're going to take him that high in the draft. But, I think that's why I love him for Phoenix, and that's why he's, my perfect match for them, because, he wouldn't have to be the lead guy in Phoenix. He could kind of just fill in all the holes, and I think that's where a lot of his skills fit, Max.
Ooh, man, we are not agreeing on this one. Cam Reddish is a super talent. He's very athletic. He's got great size. He's got incredible skill. I'm a little nervous about the fact that Cam Reddish's biggest negatives in high school were that he didn't give a shit. I'm nervous about putting more guys on the team who don't give a shit. One of the reasons why I like Zion and RJ so much for the Suns, or really for anybody, is because you can just watch those guys play and you see them they love basketball. They embrace it. They just want to be out there, and they're just imposing their will. They're forceful. The other team is just getting kind of run over by them. This is kind of the feeling. And while Cam Reddish was awesome in that game, he had 24 points. He was sick. He was great. He wasn't part of that same onslaught. It makes me nervous to put another guy in the Suns who's not necessarily going to develop himself, who's going to require some as much as I agree with you, Igor is a good offensive coach. He's a good he's the guy that if the players are listening to him can develop a player. I almost feel like at this point the Suns should just, err on the side of prospects who will develop themselves, because Booker's really the only guy who's worked out so far, and it's because he developed himself. And that's why it makes me nervous, Jeff Cam Reddish, who I agree with you is an awesome talent, but who makes me nervous in terms of that aspect of it.
It's an interesting point, and we're kind of bringing these guys up for the first time now, and I'm sure we're going to touch on them throughout the season in little segments like this. So I definitely agree with you on the overarching point of having red flags attached to any prospect that's showing those kind of things. And again, that's why it's great that we get to watch these guys for a full college season, because if he's showing signs of that throughout the season, I will definitely be in agreement with you as a potential red flag for him. But how about we move on to a non-Duke guy here?
Yep, I'll be very quick just with my team for Cam. I'll just say Atlanta, because Atlanta needs talent, and Trey with him would be great. That just makes sense to me. Okay, let's go on to Nasir Little, the UNC forward, who is interesting. I just saw on my phone he's had 16 points a half tonight, so he's kind of going off tonight. He had a little bit more of an understated game to start. He's an interesting player. He's a 6'7" wing. If you haven't seen him, he can shoot and a little bit off the dribble. His shooting mechanics are really good. He also he has a defensive intensity to him, which is nice. He's sort of your prototypical 3-and-D wing.
Yeah.
Who might have more, and that's why he's being talked about in this high conversation, because he's going to give you the 3-and-D wing, but he might be more. And the way I kind of describe him, he's like a Justice Winslow who shoots better and can maybe sort of realize what we wanted Justice Winslow to be. That's kind of how I view him. My perfect fit for him is Chicago. I just think they need a guy who's a wing size, who's going to be tough on both sides, who can shoot. Just kind of that do-everything kind of guy, which I think Nasir Little is. So that's my fit for him. David, what do you think?
Yeah, I've seen a few people say Jay Crowder with him, which, I don't really see. I really like your Justice Winslow comp, actually. That from the little that I've seen of him, I think that makes a hell of a lot more sense. I think the Crowder one, it kind of touches on what you were saying is, maybe his floor is just a nice 3-and-D wing in the NBA, but you certainly don't want to be taking a guy like Jay Crowder at potentially 4 in the draft. So you hope he can show a little bit more than that. I really like him. I love his intensity. We obviously have Suns colored glasses on when we watch these guys, and we're probably drawn a little bit more to guys like Little because of their intensity, just because we're so used to not seeing it with our NBA team, and that's why I'm slightly attracted to Little. My perfect match in the NBA, though, I'm going to take 2 here as a bit of a hedge. I'm going to say Orlando if they're around about this mark, because I think he's kind of a Orlando type player with their new philosophy that they're building around length, and I think he would fit in quite well there. But I'll also throw up if Washington does blow it up and they can't get off John Wall's contract and it's more like Bradley Beal or Otto Porter that goes, I don't mind Nasir Little in Washington.
Yeah, those both make a lot of sense to me. I think those are both great spots for Nasir Little. All right, let's move on to our last one that we're going to share, and he's an interesting one. He is Manute Bol's son, Bol, 7'2" center, plays for Oregon. I think he has a 7'8" wingspan. He's basically like, if you want to picture him, he looks kind of like Mohamed Bamba. A little less lanky in the arms, a little taller, but like he can shoot a little bit. He's a little more coordinated, I guess, than Bamba, but maybe less strong and less big. David, I find Bol like perplexing. I don't know what to think about him, David. What do you think?
He's totally perplexing. First thing I'll say before I jump into him is I need to throw out that more people need to be calling Bol Minute Manute. That should be his nickname, Max, going forward. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't. So I threw that out on Twitter, but if anyone listening here, I like Minute.
Love it.
I've got here, he's the slider for me. I could just see a guy like this falling back in the draft because of, worries about durability, things like that. I don't think he's going to be a real focus of Oregon's offense this season, so it'll be interesting to see how he can, I guess, show what he's going to do in the NBA. There's no player comparison for him, which is what you were touching on. I think kind of size-wise, and this is what I was touching on before, and kind of measurables-wise, he matches up pretty well with, say, like a Rudy Gobert when he was drafted, but they're not even close to the same player. He can probably have a similar effect on defense as his ceiling, but totally perplexing player and exactly the kind of guy that you kind of want to get a full college season in to see what he is, Max.
He looks like the prototype of a bust. He just looks like a bust. He just feels like a bust.
That might tie into my perfect match team. It might be wishful thinking here for me around a bust, but who have you got first, Max?
Ooh, we might have the same one. We'll see. By the way, I have to say real quick, Manute, that's fantastic. If you had like streakers following, that would have gone like 100,000 likes viral. But Bol for me, we'll see if you have the same one. This is interesting. I have Boston with Sacramento's pick.
Yep, that's me.
Do you have it? Yep. Okay. They can afford to take a giant risk because who the fuck cares? They're Boston. They have a million good players anyway. Horford's old. Like, get a center in there. Like, why the hell not? Take a home run swing. Also, last point. They were reported to love Bamba in the last draft, which who knows if that's true or not. But maybe they're enamored with freakish centers.
Yeah, I don't want anyone to come at me that's listening to this with this comparison, but when I was thinking of player comparisons, he's kind of got a little bit of Al Horford about him. Now, I'm not saying that they're the same player,
right?
But in terms of what Al Horford brings to the Celtics, a little bit of everything, a little bit of passing, a little bit of rim protection, can shoot the three. That's kind of what Bol is. At absolute ceiling, he's going to do one or two of those things, maybe potentially better than Al Horford and not have as great an all-round game as Al Horford, who I still think is criminally underrated. But,
yes.
As you said, he's aging. He'll probably go back to the Celtics, but he's not going to have forever left. And in terms of that young core going, they've kind of got point guard sorted as long as they re-sign Kyrie. They've got a whole bunch of wings. So, yeah, I think they can take the gamble on a guy like Bol.
Yeah, that would be a Danny Ainge, for the older listeners, Seinfeld reference. I'm Keith Hernandez moment. It's like, whatever, man. I'm Danny Ainge. I can pick whoever I want. That's what that would be. So let's move on. Let's go on to our own personal prospects who we think are really good and we want to follow but didn't quite put in the top 5. I'll start. Mine's Romeo Langford.
Interesting.
He's like a shooting guard. I love Indiana University. My dad went there and I follow them. Just love the school. Romeo Langford to me looks kind of like a young Ray Allen.
Okay.
Very athletic, can shooting guard. He's got 6'5", 6'11" wingspan, like very good size. I think a lot of people who don't like him kind of see him as like a gunner who doesn't do a lot else. I don't see it that way. I think he's just a really, really good shooter for his age. I think he just was the best player ever he was, and that's why he gunned so much. It's kind of surprising athletic. People forget how athletic Ray Allen is, which is how I kind of got the comparison. Like Ray Allen, like early Ray Allen, UConn days, early NBA when he was in the dunk contest. Like that kind of like 6'5" shooting guard who surprises you when he just like dunks on you.
Jesus Shuttleworth, Ray Allen.
Yeah, exactly. Jesus Shuttleworth, Ray Allen. That kind of like a surprising athleticism, I think, is what Romeo's got. I want to follow him because he's got like that kind of like scoring upside that interesting to me. I like him in Orlando. I think that if they don't get RJ, that'd be the next best thing. Get somebody who can kind of be your primary option on the offense.
Yeah, the one I'm going to be watching is Sekou Doumbouya, who's an international prospect, Max. He's 6'9", out of France. I'm kind of intrigued by this guy. I wouldn't say that I love him as a prospect. I'm just really intrigued by what he brings. And I think he is kind of the guy that shows the strength of this draft and where it drops off. I think the fact that he's around, listed in mock drafts, around this at kind of 6 or 7 really shows where the clear drop-off is, because I don't think, he certainly wouldn't have gone 6 or 7 in the draft that's just gone, Max. So, I've got Phoenix question mark here for a lot of the reasons that I like Cam Reddish fit-wise, but I think, Doumbouya is exactly the kind of guy that Phoenix should be avoiding for reasons that you mentioned earlier, because he's just got red flags all over the place. Kind of a Al-Farouq Aminu type, maybe, with a bit better feel for the game. That's kind of the gist that I get with him. And my perfect match here is Atlanta, particularly if they manage to fall into Dallas's pick and have 2 firsts. I could see them taking a flyer on a guy like this because he kind of fits a position that they maybe don't have with that young core around Trey and Huerta and John Collins and a few others, Prince and maybe Spellman to add to that as well, Max. Yeah. But yeah, I'm just going to watch him.
Yeah, I like him on Atlanta. That's a good one because I think you need to be in a place that like is going to ready to like develop him, because as far as I can see, he's just like not very good at basketball, but has like all the physical tools. So he's got to go somewhere where they just like know what he's going to be and they can mold him into it. It's kind of how I see him.
Exactly.
All right. I think that's it for our little draft segment. That was fun. I enjoyed that. David, I think it's your turn though for 7 seconds or less. Is that right?
It is, Max. I'm calling this the Igor's future 7 seconds or less.
Oh, God.
We've seen pretty mixed views on his current job security. So I just thought I'd tap into yours, and we'll throw the questions out on Twitter during the week, and we can kind of see how the listeners are feeling as well. But the Suns' schedule isn't about to let up anytime soon, Max. So I'll run through the next few games, and I want you to say stop when you think the Suns will win their next game. So
okay.
At New Orleans, at OKC.
Stop. Sorry, I said stop, but I don't think that OKC is going to lose. I just want to point out, or OKC is going to lose to the Suns. I just want to point out that OKC's won 7 games in a row. Go on.
At home to the Spurs, at home to OKC again, at Philadelphia, and returning home against Chicago.
Stop. We can win that one, right?
Yeah, I thought that's where you might say it. So we're currently 2-9. If we win that Bulls game, it will be 3-15 at that point. So, Max, follow-up question. Does Igor survive if we don't win any games between now and the Chicago game?
I will answer that in a second. I just want to point out that my prediction before the season, I believe, was that we would be 3-15. But, to answer your question, yes. I think Igor is safe until the new year. They won't fire him until the new year, but I think that if he gets much into January with this sort of thing going on, yeah, he might be gone.
That kind of ties into questions 2 and 3. So from there, things get a little easier, Max. There's another 13 games from the Chicago game until the unofficial trade opening of December 15. So assuming things stay bad, say we're around 5-23 or something like that, will the Suns make a trade or fire Igor first in order to try and turn things around?
Make a trade. I think that the Suns are aware of their reputation as being a dumpster fire and are not going to fire their coach if they don't absolutely feel like they have to.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and you alluded to that before, so I'll jump into 3 here. We've said it for a while that total wins didn't matter too much for this season, and as you said, you kind of already predicted 3-15, but maybe the games themselves haven't gone quite as we expected from Igor's standpoint. So assuming he does survive the season out, what are a couple of the things from here that will need to happen for it to, get to the end of the season and kind of consider the season for Phoenix and for Igor a success, Max?
I think the way this season turns into a success, which, by the way, this is going to really exceed 7 seconds because this is impossible 7 seconds. I think the way this season turns into success, obviously they're not making the playoffs. I mean, no one thinks they're making the playoffs. They need to just get to a point where not only are they competing in these games, which they're not doing now, but they need to get to that point. They're competing because the people who are the future, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, Mikal Bridges, in my opinion, DeAnthony Melton, Elie Kobo, all the guys who are actually going to be a part of this team, like the next time they're good, they're the reason why this team is competitive. I'm not saying they're going to be good or win games, but they just need to show signs that they're real basketball players on a real basketball team. Even the Boston game last night, if we have a ton of those games, that'd be awesome. And guess what, David? If the Boston game had been the way we were losing every one of these games, it would have been not a problem. That's great. The problem is we had all the blowout losses and then the Boston game. But if we just get a bunch of fun games where we're losing, that's a win. That's a win. Because we can be happy about what we're doing. We're building something. We can get a good draft pick out of it too because we're not winning games. We're just being close in games. And to me, that's how this season turns into a win. It's that this team's just starting to show some life. And at the same time, we're still kind of bad, so we can get RJ or Zion. That's how I'll get bought back into this. But if we keep getting blown out, David, that's just sad.
Yeah, I think that's all fans wanted when the season started. I think the blowouts have really changed the kind of overall perceptions of fans, at least that I'm seeing. So, I think you said it perfectly. He was kind of hired and mentioned as a development coach. So a lot of it's going to be tied to the development of these young guys with him going forward, Max. But yeah, an extended 7 seconds or less there. I think we can finish the episode there.
So as always, you can follow us. I'm Max MCC11 on Twitter. David is at the 4 Point Play on Twitter. Our podcast is at 7SOL Pod on Twitter. Please rate, review, and subscribe. It actually really helps us if you review. We haven't gotten a review in a while, so I'm going to say this right now. We have 38 reviews. The 39th review we'll read live on air, and we'll attribute it to you, and we'll love you forever. We'll give you all the props. You can ask us a question, we'll answer it. Just the 39th review, that's an important review for us, David. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, they just can't talk about our pronunciations, or else they're definitely not getting read out on the next episode, Max.
Yeah, if you even so much suggest the word pronunciation or our pronunciations, you will not be read out. That is for sure. That's the one thing on this podcast. We don't ban anything on this podcast, David. The one thing we ban is pronunciation talk.
Exactly, but as you said, Max, this was a fun one, and hang in there, Suns fans. I think things are going to click really soon, and we'll have some more discussion about the games and hopefully some fun Phoenix basketball, Max.
Yep, totally agree. Till next time, guys.